Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Deercast. This evening, we're joined by Peter Jones, who is the founder of the Capreolus Club, County Deer Stalking, and the Shooting and Hunting Academy, who do the PDS 1 and 2. We were at the stalking show, Tom and I, and we cornered Peter and asked him if he'd be very kind and come and join us on the podcast, because we're big fans of all of his videos and all the things he's put out there, and he very kindly agreed. So, Peter, without further ado, would you like to just introduce yourself and give us a bit of background as to sort of how you got into shooting and how it all sort of started for you?
Well, good evening, gents, and thanks very much for inviting me onto the Deercast. Excited to be here. I don't think I took too much pressurising at the stalking show, did I? And anything for a little bit of publicity. So appreciate you approaching me to speak.
I think you were just slightly tired and jaded by the end of the 2 days, and us two Muppets coming up to you just before it finished saying, "Can you come on the podcast?" You're like, "I'll do anything you want, just leave me alone and let me go home."
Well, it was, I'll tell you what, actually, it was a good event, wasn't it? And, before I tell you more about me, I think that gave us a real insight into the industry lately. I think many years ago, I don't think you'd have been able to put on an event like the stalking show. I don't think we'd have probably had the turnout. But this year, it was a really good event, and I think a credit to the industry, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
What I love about it compared to every other show is the fact that everyone is just there to help each other and support each other. It feels like such a collaborative atmosphere, whereas there's so many other shows where it seems to be all about each individual person making as much money as they possibly can, whereas the stalking show does feel like one of those kind of genuine places where you go there to meet people, learn from each other, and just have a good time.
It was a super friendly event, and in truth, we were really pleased to be able to go along, because it gave us very much an opportunity to meet people who perhaps we had only engaged with via email or via the YouTube channel. So it gave us an opportunity to meet people face to face, and it was absolutely fabulous, and it was nice to be able to sort of meet some of those guys and girls, and in a nice, friendly environment. But coming back to your question, so Harry, well done. You got all three titles of what I do and our businesses. Capreolus Club Limited is the umbrella. That's the umbrella company, and under that falls County Deer Stalking, and more recently the Shooting and Hunting Academy. So yes, they're the three companies that I have founded. I've been in the industry for a long time now, I suppose, a bit older than you guys. But I was stalking and shooting probably since I was a boy, I suppose, like a lot of us, air guns. I think, out spending hours and hours as some sort of social recluse in the woods in camouflage, shooting sort of pigeons and rabbits and that sort of thing. And it kind of, that, having grown up on a farm, that kind of evolved very nicely into shotguns, and taking it a step up, getting a shotgun certificate when I was, what would it have been, 16, and then a firearm certificate at 18, and then getting involved with the local deer stalker on the farm back then was something that I absolutely loved to do, right up until I went off, did my degree, and then thereafter joined the police. But even through that sort of career, even through when I was studying and in the police force, I was always dipping my toe back into my passion, which of course has been field sports, and in particular shooting. And it was I suppose a great privilege when eventually, after 10 years in the police, which I thoroughly enjoyed, after 10 years in the police, I was able to sort of set out on my own and set up what was then County Deer Stalking as a kind of as a sideline job, and the rest is history, as they say.
And did you know that was your sort of ultimate goal, in terms of, if you forgive me for asking this, was work a kind of means to an end, in terms of you thought, right, I'm going to do my time and then I can go back and do kind of the deer stuff? Or did you just kind of reach a natural point in the police where you thought, you know what, my heart's with deer stalking, I'm going to go in that direction.
Do you know, Tom, in truth, I was caught out by the Northern Rock and Lehman Brothers crash. I don't know whether you remember that, but in actual fact, when I was in the police, I was doing 10 years as a police detective. And towards the end of that, I was in property. Now, I think you guys might be Savills and Knight Frank, so you'll know a little bit about what that entails. So I was into development, residential property and that type of thing. And so the police, it didn't take long, needless to say, before that was earning more money than the day job as a civil servant. So I left the police after 10 years, in actual fact, to set up as a full-time property developer. And no kind of crystal ball there, because literally as I left the police, there was the Northern Rock run on the bank, wasn't there? There was Lehman Brothers and all the financial crash and nightmare that then ensued. So quite honestly, it was slightly bad timing, but by then I'd been in the business for quite a long time. And after a while of kind of juggling the financial purse strings with property and realizing that the market had much gone out of property, I sort of set up County Deer Stalking as a kind of hobby job, believe it or not. I thought, well, I'll run a property portfolio, and on the side, I'll do a little bit of deer stalking. I'll enjoy doing something that I love, take a few people stalking, get back into that side, get a little bit of extra income. But, you know, I think in truth, it was very fortuitous timing, because it was about that time, I think, that deer stalking really started taking off. I mean, it's always been very much a minority field sport. And I think around that sort of 2009, 2010, there was a real uplift in interest in deer stalking. You know, deer, as we know, you know, there was a ballooning population. And of course, you know, with the internet and websites and blogs and bits and pieces, I was able to tap into that increasing demand and interest. And within a very short space of time, I found that county deer stalking was taking up pretty much all of my time. So I was running some properties on the side, but I found that I was getting more and more busy taking clients out, writing blogs, doing reviews, that type of thing. And it was a very kind of organic thing. It led me into the industry, and it's always tricky setting up a business on your own. But I think I was, you know, more by good luck than good judgment and good timing, really. I was able to springboard off what was this fabulous sort of growing interest in the sport that I loved.
So there was sort of one market going down and the other going up, if you like.
Yeah, it's fortunate, isn't it? That's right. Absolutely right.
Absolutely.
You know,
well,
so it was, you know, it was as you say, I think, you know, during that financial crash, that's when people in property really had to work hard. In truth, you know, it'd have been very easy in property up until then, gents, and you know, it was easy to make a bob or two, but it was only in that financial crash that you really actually had to earn a living. And so, you know, fortunately, you know, I weathered the storm there and sort of kept hold of what I could. But it was absolute, I suppose, by the grace of God, that this, you know, this county deer stalking really started taking off and burgeoning and really grew beyond my sort of wildest expectations, I suppose.
And you mentioned your sort of. Oh, sorry.
Go on, Harry. Oh, well, I was going to say it's quite a beast now, isn't it? In terms, or it seems from the outside, in terms of you've got county deer stalking, sort of taking clients out stalking. You've got the films that you make as well. Then Capreolus Club, your members club, and then now lately, all the various different qualifications and training courses and everything that you're running as well. So is it you full time running all this, or have you got people helping you? How do you manage it all? I suppose is what I'm asking.
Yeah, Tom, it would be more than I could cope with, as you can imagine. It has. I mean, it's grown enormously since I first founded County Deer Stalking. What would that be? Sort of 15 years ago now, I suppose. It's grown almost out of all recognition. But it has, as I said earlier, it's grown very organically, and I've been lucky enough to been, I suppose, had my hand held and led over the last 15 years as to where the business wanted to go. And so I've been a firm believer that you've got to follow where the market takes you. There's no point in trying to force something if it's just not there. And County Deer Stalking, I mean, that evolved after, I suppose, about 5 years. That evolved into Capreolus Club, because I found that, amongst my County Deer Stalking clients, that a lot of them wanted a slightly more high touch service. So, they were coming to me and they were saying, look, I don't just want to stalk in the southeast. I want to go to the Highlands, or I want to go to Europe. Where should I go? Or, they might tap into perhaps my understanding of sort of firearms legislation, sort of get some assistance on their firearms application, or really, require a little bit of mentoring and training. So it kind of led me, I suppose, County Deer Stalking led me into the Capreolus Club, and those guys that wanted that high touch service then were able to join that Capreolus Club, which offered them something a little bit extra to what County Deer Stalking was giving them. So that evolved very organically, and that would be Capreolus Club now is coming up to coming up to its 10-year anniversary, I think, next April. So
wow.
that's been terrific. We started off with, I think, 14 original members. Now we're somewhere between well over 150, not far from sort of 200 members, that type of thing. And that's been really, really exciting. And watching that grow has been an absolute privilege.
Wow, that's incredible.
Did the training side evolve in a similar way, in terms of you'd obviously got this core of people you took out stalking, you'd then got people that joined a sort of membership organization to provide them with, I suppose, social activities, but also kind of a hunting agency, if I can put it that way, in terms of you were offering them sort of trips around the world, potentially in the UK, and then within both of those groups you had people that needed more training and time from you, and so you thought, okay, well, I'll bolt another bit onto that, and that's where that came from? Or is it something different, Tom, entirely?
I think, Tom, what's been really interesting about County Deer Stalking, because it was a very big site. I mean, we're probably about 1,000 pages on Google, added to that the YouTube films and so on. So we get a very big audience. So we engage with, I suppose, I'm going to guess sort of well over between 1,000 and 2,000 people each day. And a lot of those, by virtue of the fact that it is quite a big footprint on the internet, a lot of them are beginners. So it was a very natural transition for those beginners to require or need some type of training. And again, organic, that's the word here, because I found that invariably when a beginner would perhaps be browsing the internet, they'd come across an article or a film, and then they'd pick up the phone and they'd say, look, I'm interested in this deer stalking, what's it all about? But they would have very little experience. And some of them, of course, may not have picked up a rifle. And so, it was only fair to them, and of course fair to, the deer themselves, that before they set out stalking, that they got a little bit of training. And I quickly learned that there was very little point in taking a complete novice straight out and putting them in front of a deer, because almost invariably it led to mistakes. And I found again and again that I was probably, with these beginners, with these clients, having to give more and more of myself in terms of a trainer, more and more of the mentor, where to place that shot, how to behave. And by simply offering them some training before they launched into their first outings deer stalking, it meant that they got much more out of the experience. They thoroughly enjoyed the experience. The success rates suddenly went up, because they were able to get on their deer and dispatch it humanely. And, overall, the whole experience was a much richer one. And so the transition, I suppose, from setting up County Deer Stalking and the original blog as it was then to offering training was very, was very natural, was a very natural step to take. And in fact, we were then doing something which we called the Proficient Deer Stalker. I was offering that course, and as was a couple of colleagues, and we were offering that course to these beginners as long ago as, I suppose, 12 years ago, that type of thing. But of course, we were only able to provide that course to people in the field on an individual basis. So it was quite interesting, actually, because that I suppose limited our ability to be able to deliver that course and deliver that training. But then, of course, along came this pandemic, which which is now in the rearview mirror, thank God. But along came, well, we hope so. So along came the pandemic, and we realised that people sitting in classrooms doing courses was fast becoming a thing of the past. And it seemed a very natural transition to say, well, look, you don't need to sit in a classroom to look at a whole load of slides and to sit in an exam. These days, looking ahead, e-learning platforms, online learning is something that allows people to access good quality training without the need to perhaps travel half the length of the country, sit in a classroom, stay away in a B&B, but still get the quality training that you might get otherwise. So that was a real impetus, I suppose, that pandemic, for us to be able to get that PDS1 online on an e-learning platform, which of course is today, as you know it, the Shooting and Hunting Academy, and that's been an absolutely terrific success, and something that's allowed us to then to offer that throughout the UK, because suddenly now, whether you are in the Highlands of Scotland, whether you're down in Devon, or whether you're in in Norfolk, you can do that PDS1 from from the comfort of your own living room, perhaps on the train into work, at a weekend, without the rigmarole of traveling around the country, and as I say, and going to great expense and effort to sit in a classroom. So that's really how that evolved.
It's interesting you say that. I feel it is quite a constraint if you want to get into deer stalking, because not only will quite a lot of firearms authorities require you to do your DSC1, but also it's often quite hard to get onto one of the courses, because there aren't that many people running them all over the place, and they get booked up really quickly. And with the increase in deer stalking and the number of people who are just desperate for this learning, I remember I think it took me about nearly a year to get onto a course that was sort of not so far away that I actually had to drive and stay overnight to do it, but also find one that was booked. So yeah, it's really interesting you sort of say that. Where would you sort of put, because I think most of our listeners probably would have done their DSC1 but might not be fully aware of the sort of PDS 1 and 2. Where would you sort of, how would you compare those to the DSC1, and where do you sort of see them fitting in, if you like? Would you do your PDS1 before doing your DSC, or how does that sort of fit, if you like?
Harry, I think what I want to make absolutely clear to your listeners right off is the fact that the DMQ have done an absolutely brilliant job over the years of making sure that there are well-trained stalkers out there. So when I talk of the PDS and the training that is now offered, as a Lantra qualification, it's by no means whatsoever to undermine the credibility of DMQ. DMQ, DSC1, DSC2 are great qualifications. I've done them myself. I'm a approved witness for DSC2. I've been through that route. What we are about, Harry, I suppose, what we are trying to do is offer choice. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said how difficult it is to perhaps jump on a course to access, that DSC training. And so I think, training is what it's about, and education is what it's all about. And if deer stalking is to become popular, if deer stalking is to have a good reputation, then we need to be able to allow people to access quality training. It's not in our interests that deer stalking is in some way some type of opaque industry which people don't know how to get into, or they don't know how to access training. I mean, what we're trying to do through the Shooting and Hunting Academy is allow people through the the touch of a button on their PCs or their laptops suddenly to engage with us, to actually to be able to engage and access training, and I suppose shine a light on what that training looks like without having to wait several months to sit, to go along to a DSC1 course, because it's through that training, guys, it's through that education that we are able to transmit what we do to a wider audience. And so what I would say, and you asked me, how does it sit with DSC1? Well, I would say, it sits parallel to. Some people will always choose and wish to go and do the DSC1. They will prefer the classroom-based training, and they will enjoy that type of environment. And, brilliant, good for them. And I genuinely mean that. We've got lots of people in our club. I've got lots of clients who have done that DSC1 training. But what we want to do is offer choice. And for those people that don't want to do that, and perhaps are able to engage better with an e-learning platform than they might be through a classroom, or simply they haven't got the time to go and spend several days away from work or busy lives and families, then we have the PDS1 route. So it's really, I think, about engaging a wider audience, about offering a parallel qualification, a deer stalking qualification that allows people to get this, essentially what is a very similar syllabus, but through a different delivery. And that's what we're about.
I think it's come at an amazing time from a couple of different perspectives. Firstly, that burgeoning interest in people wanting to do their training. But secondly, I think a lot of people before would have gone, well, I'm going to do my DSC1 because that includes my game meat hygiene certificate. But actually the detaching of that from DSC1 and the fact that's separate, I think that then does open up, to my mind, much more or makes that choice much easier for people, or gives them more choice, because they can say, well, now I can do my PDS1 or I can do my DSC1, because the two qualifications side by side sit much more parallel than perhaps they did when you had DSC1 and your game meat hygiene, perhaps.
Tom, to my mind, it's the future. E-learning online, it's got to be the future, hasn't it? Because and we find time again, getting a firearms license, getting into deer stalking can be a slow process, as it is. We know that a lot of police firearms licensing departments are not issuing firearms licenses for 6 months to a year very often. Now, if you add on to that a wait of a few months to get onto a course, then you're adding to the frustration here of people. And I don't think that people are usually patient enough, or certainly the clients that I deal with, they're not patient enough to wait what essentially could be a year and a half to pursue something that they have developed an interest in. And why should they? Why should they have to wait that long? It's a tragedy, because all it acts as is a barrier. It acts as a barrier to people coming into field sports, and that's a great shame. And I think, Tom, thank you for pointing that out. One of the things that we do offer with that PDS1 is the food safety, food hygiene certificate, and that again is something which is important, because let's remember that deer stalking, the primary purpose is about putting food on your plate, isn't it? It's about taking venison home to you to eat, to consume wild, sustainable, free-range meat, get it home, serve it to your family and friends, and further educate people about what it's all about. So by putting that food hygiene certificate onto the PDS1, it allows people to safely incorporate that into their training. And I think that when we look at the essence of what deer stalking is all about, I think that that's a really important part of their training that everyone should be able to access.
Very eloquently put.
Considering it's 8 o'clock in the evening, I'm.
Yeah. You probably won't be surprised, because we do an Instagram poll a few days before we record these episodes, and we always say to people, what would you like us to ask our guests? And you won't be surprised that a lot of the questions we got were in relation to the PDS1, etc. So we've actually sort of knocked quite a lot of those off. But one of them that sort of is probably quite a neat transition from kind of you as a deer stalker onto kind of listener questions was a question that came in from someone calls themselves Mensa20 on Instagram, said, how did Peter's time in the police benefit him later as a professional stalker?
Well, thanks for the question, firstly. Goodness me. Well, I mean, it's a long time ago, gents, now that I was in the police. I actually left the police literally during the, in just, I think, a few days before the tragic 7/7 bombings. So that would have been July 2007. So it's been a long time since I was in the police. But I think, if I was to take away a few things from my career in the police, I would say that probably, I mean, inevitably, you're dealing with people day in, day out. So, an ability to be able to relate to people, get on with people, to get on with all walks of life. I mean, that's an enormous benefit. Having an understanding of the law, I mean, that again in life, I think, gives you a good footing, especially when you start coming to deal with firearms. But I'm not necessarily even talking about specifically about firearms legislation. I think having an understanding of public order offences and trespass and all these types of things is invaluable sort of grounding, I suppose, for a deer stalker. So that's been undoubtedly enormously useful. But I think probably there's been other benefits. I mean, we've got as well as the PDS1, which is a Lantra course now, we've also got the only Lantra zookeepers course for the use of firearms that's in the UK. And that was a very interesting process, rolling out that course, because and something where perhaps a police background was quite useful, because you are essentially in those situations where you've got a dangerous animal escape, you are essentially dealing with the emergency services. You've got to liaise with the police, you've got to talk about rendezvous points and all this type of thing. And so in formulating that firearms course for zookeepers, that was invaluable, I suppose, as a kind of a police background. But overall, there were a lot of benefits. But as I say, it's a long time ago now.
And that zookeeper course, I'm fascinated. Is that do you have to do some sort of practical element to achieve that certificate? Because that sounds like quite a dangerous,
You just want to have a go, don't you, Harry?
Well, I'll tell you what, Harry, I have to say that a lot of the zookeepers that we engage, they love getting on the team. There's what they call a capture team, and getting on that team allows them to go out every 3 months, because it is refresher training, several times a year. So about every 3 months, this team has to come out, and they will have to demonstrate that they are able to handle we use a pump action shotgun and a 416 Rigby, because essentially you are dealing with some very large animals and very dangerous animals. And I think it always surprises people when you actually look back at, because people think, well, does it ever really happen though? Does anyone ever actually get into the enclosure, or does any animal ever get out? And in truth, they do. I mean, you only have to look at, you probably guys may remember Harambe, the gorilla, where the toddler fell into the enclosure. There's other instances of a German school teacher climbing in with the polar bears, and and chap in Chile, I think, climbed in with the lions and was tranquilized, wasn't he, by one of the zookeepers by mistake. Instead of they tranquilizing the animal, they tranquilized him. Probably for the best. I've got a lot of sympathy for him. But it was a fascinating course, Harry. And there we go. Maybe you should get on the Shooting and Hunting Academy and take it, Harry. You might enjoy it. But it has what it does essentially on that academy is it gives you all the theory element, all the knowledge that a zookeeper might need. And then, of course, what they can do and what some of them will do is then engage us in order to deliver the practical elements of it. Which, incidentally, chaps, if I may just come back to and circle back round to that PDS1, one of the interesting things that allows us to deliver that PDS1 throughout the UK is because, yes, the Shooting and Hunting Academy delivers the modules, the classes, the knowledge, the theory, and gives you and demonstrates to you a lot of the practical skills. At some stage, of course, you need to be able to demonstrate that you can handle the rifle safely and place a few well-aimed shots. And for that, we have a series of approved verifiers who are around the UK, everywhere from Scotland to Hastings, and they will be able to take out a PDS1 candidate and assess them in the field and check that their safety and rifle handling and marksmanship is sufficient to be able to complete the course. So a little bit different to how the zoo scheme operates, but a very effective way of rolling it out nationally.
Fascinating.
So I realised I was very cruel launching into such a serious question for your first listener question, Peter. So I'm going to start. Well, I'm going to apologise by giving you a slightly easier one, which I think is probably I'm pretty sure I know is an inside joke. So this is from the Instagram name is London Jaeger. So you're now racking your brains, going, "Oh, I know who that is."
I know who that is. That's Charlie, isn't it?
Yeah. So
hello, Charlie. I'm sure you'll be listening to this. So come on, go on. What's the question?
His question was, why has Peter not got Charlie, I presume himself, onto a gold medal roebuck yet?
Well, I know what he's after here. He's after a public apology, isn't he?
Oh, is he?
Do you know, Charlie's he's a wonderful guy, actually. I have to say that because he'll be listening. But, a lot of your listeners may have seen him, actually. He's appeared in quite a lot of our County Deer Stalking YouTube films. There was the Giants of Exmoor he was in. And then he was also in a film that we did up in Downess, I think, up in Glenative, and then another one down in the New Forest. And despite giving him all this free, wonderful publicity, gents, he's still crucifying me over the fact that I haven't got him a gold medal roebuck yet. So, but nonetheless, Charlie, I'm working hard, mate. I'll get on that as soon as I can.
You could have had a really easy way out there and just said you've got him into so many and he just fluffs the shot, or he's a terrible stalker and gives the game away or something like that, and got yourself off scot-free.
I'm not such a pro as you, Tom, at this. So
there you go. Moving on to another very controversial topic of calibers, which always comes up, but it's always interesting to hear people's opinions. We've had a couple of questions on it, so perhaps you could answer both. Mo Sharan has asked, for big deer in the UK, would you recommend 308, 270 or 6.5 Creedmoor? And then we've also had, Tom shaking his head, we've also had a question which was your preferred caliber to cover all the UK deer species.
Well, calibers, it's always going to come up, isn't it? I bet there's not been a guest on that hasn't been asked the calibers question.
No.
The debate continues to rage, doesn't it? And what's been quite interesting, I suppose, over the last sort of, God knows, 2 decades while I've been deer stalking, is that you get these new kids on the block every now and then. And believe it or not, and this may come as a surprise to you, Tom and Harry, both of you, that, I remember when the 6.5 by 55 Swedish was the kind of new kid on the block. And now it's one of the stalwarts of UK deer stalking. But, now we've got this 6.5 Creedmoor, haven't we? But it's brilliant to see, and I think it's no surprise that there are still some of the iconic calibers out there. And I think it's interesting that Mo's coined the choice between 308. Sorry, no, he said 270, didn't he? 308 or 6.5 Creedmoor. So I think it's interesting that there's 2 iconic calibers there, and there's also the new kid on the block, the 6.5 Creedmoor. I say new kid on the block. I think it's probably been about for about over a decade now, in fact. But it's increasingly getting used now by deer stalkers, and I think I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised if it's becoming one of the most popular calibers out there for every new firearms applicant. Whenever we talk to a new member of the club or new client and we're discussing calibers, almost invariably the Creedmoor will come up. So let's look at them in turn. Well, that Creedmoor, you know, gents, it was devised, wasn't it, to beat the 308. I think it's a collaboration between Hornady and Creedmoor, and you know, they did a hell of a job at it. I think, you know, if I pick the things in which it's going to beat the 308, and less wind drift, less recoil, flatter trajectory. I don't think, I'd have to check the records, I don't think it hits quite as hard as the 308 in deer stalking ranges. I mean, maybe a little bit different once you get above 500 yards or so, but at typical deer stalking ranges out to sort of 200-300 yards max, I don't think it hits quite as hard as the 308, but it does tick a lot of the other boxes. So it's a cracker, and you know, it's a great caliber to have. I think probably what would answer your Mo's question best is if I pointed out the fact that I have in my cabinet for UK deer stalking. I've got a few calibers, as you can imagine, but my go-to caliber is the 308. But I've actually just done a renewal. Yeah, I see Tom. That's right. You're the same, aren't you, Tom?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know,
you can't beat it. A lot of people criticize it for being a bit loopy, but you've just got to learn to factor that in, and you're absolutely fine. It's nowhere near as bad as everyone says it is.
Well, Tom, I think you're absolutely right, and you know, you can even take the curve in that trajectory out, because you can come right down to 110 grains in ammunition, and then you've got a caliber that's shooting as flat as many of the others, the 270, the 6.5 Creedmoor, just by adjusting the grain weight, and that, I think, is what's great about that 308 is its versatility, because you can go from 110 grains for a flat shooting Highland caliber, for example, all the way up to 180 grains or even more if you're perhaps going onto the continent and shooting some big boar at close range. So you know, as a one-stop shop, I think that 308 is terrific. But I've had that in my cabinet for an awful long time, and I've just put in for a renewal of my firearms certificate. We all have to do it, I'm afraid, even us professional stalkers. So I just put in for a renewal, and at the same time, I've sought a variation for, believe it or not, here we go, a 270 and a 6.5 Creedmoor. So there we go.
Wow.
So I shall be adding them to my repertoire of deer stalking calibers. You know, they're all great, and they'll all do the job, I think, is the
You'll
point.
be able to give us the full verdict at the end once you've had them for a little
absolutely.
while.
I think you've got to remember that, you know, calibers are going to be relevant to topography. They're going to be relevant to species. You know, if I was going up and shooting reds up in the Highlands as a professional stalker, I'd probably go the 270, if I'm honest with you. But if I was to have just one caliber in my gun cabinet, and this includes having considered that 270 and that 6.5 Creedmoor, I'm sorry, I know it's a yawn. Everyone's going to be yawning that's listening to this, but 308, it takes a lot of beating, if not for anything else other than availability of ammunition as well. You know, your local gun shop's always going to have 308 in stock, aren't they?
Yeah.
And if you go abroad, you go over to Africa, it's still acceptable over there. It's acceptable on the continent. It's going to be acceptable in the States. They're all going to have 308 ammunition. But you venture out to Africa and ask for some 6.5 Creedmoor because you've left it at home, and you're going to be using the estate rifle, aren't you?
We ought to keep track of what everyone said in all our episodes, because I think if we kept track of what everyone said, I think the 308 would be, if not first place, definitely second in terms of what most people recommend.
Well, I've been a relatively recent adopter of the 308 as well, mainly because of the sort of, you know, rise of copper, etc. But I'm also a very big fan of the 2506, which I was using exclusively up until that point. So yeah, I love caliber for purpose.
The Wildcat caliber, the 2506, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant caliber. I think that's a really interesting one, actually. And interesting, none of us have mentioned that 30-06 either, have we? Great caliber, kicks a bit too much by my mind. Doesn't give you much. The 308's that's going to give you, but kicks a little bit more. But 25-06, I don't know, a bit punchy in the shoulder.
No, not at all. It's like it's similar. I used to shoot a 243, and to me, it's very, very difficult to tell the difference. But then again, I'm shooting probably the lighter end of the spectrum 2506, and the heavier end on the spectrum of the 243. So they're sort of they've got similar ballistics at that kind of those grain weights. So I guess
I mean, essentially it's a neck down 30-06, isn't it? But what grain weight do you favour?
I like the 117 grain. Can't go wrong with that. And in Scotland they're fantastic. I take it up and use it on hinds every year, and it's fantastic. The wind.
There we go. The debate continues to rage.
It does.
We could keep on all night, couldn't we?
I'm going to ask you one more nerdy rifle question,
please,
and then I promise that'll be over.
No, I can be quite nerdy, Tom. So please,
well, this might open your inner nerd then. So this is a question from Jason S, and he said, "What top 3 rifles in 243 would you recommend for a beginner?"
Right. Okay. Well, that's a goodie, isn't it? I had the privilege to go down and look at a few rifles. I think I'm going to flatter myself that some of you may have seen it. We did a film down at Braces of Bristol with. It
was very good.
He's a jolly good chap, I must say, and it was a pleasure to go down there and look at some of the rifles that were on offer. I think we got berated by the US, our followers in the US, for not mentioning a single American-made rifle. But they all tended to be Europeans, and I think probably if you are on a budget, which most of us are in the present economic climate, if I'm honest, I think probably my money would be on the Mauser M12. I think is a nice rifle. It's very tactile. It's got that wonderful Mauser action, really good. I think probably about a little over $1,000 for that. So not much more money than the Tikka T3, but perhaps an extra couple of £100. But I think you get a lot more from that Mauser. And if you're feeling a little bit flush and you want to spend a little bit more, then Sauer 100 takes a bit of beating. But they're the kind of, I suppose, the starter rifles, the rifles for those that are on a budget. If you want to really, open up the purse strings and stretch and afford something a bit special, then, I'm a big fan of going up to I must say I like the Seiko 85, what is now the Seiko 90. Big fan of that. Blaser R8, really, really good rifle. Sauer 404 thumb hole in carbon, I think is beautiful. I must say is lovely. But interestingly, and I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent if I can here, chaps.
Go on.
Whilst I've got it's been an interesting question for me, I must say, and your questioner there has asked, what rifles to go for there. Well, I've got a few of these things in my cabinet, and I've got this new slot, this 270 and this 6.5 Creedmoor now, and I have been racking my brains as to what to go for. I've got a Blaser, I've got a Sauer, I've got a Seiko or a Sarco. So what do you go for next? Well, I must say I'm quite tempted by the. Here we go. I feel like I almost need a drum roll here. I'm quite tempted by that Merkel Helix. I must say, I think that's quite a nice looking rifle. But do you know what my top contender is? The rifle that I really aspire to, if I can only lay my hands on one, is the Blaser K95.
There you go. Tom was waiting for that.
It's a beauty. So I'm winning a lot of favour with you, Tom, aren't I, today?
Every guest that comes on.
And now the K95, you fan?
For once, I've got a Merkel K3, which is the Merkel version of the Kipplauf rifle. And in every single podcast, I always bring it up. And Harry always berates me for bringing it up, or bring up Kipplauf rifles. So this podcast episode, I promised myself I wouldn't mention Kipplauf rifles. So you have done it for me, Peter. So I'm a happy man. We can end the episode there, and I'm happy.
I accepted that bribe, Tom. I brought it up for you.
Yeah.
In all honesty, chaps, I don't think, if you're out doing deer stalking as a job, if you're out there perhaps on the hill and you've got to whack a hind and then take a couple of followers, you've got to take a follower, then you're going to need, the quick action that a turn bolt or a straight pull is going to give you. And yeah, so really, if you're doing it as a job, Tom, I'm not really convinced that break barrel is gonna do it for you. But for me, I personally, I think it just comes back. There's something about the simplicity of it, There's something about that one shot kill, that lightweight rifle that really appeals to me. So watch this space. I don't know. I might be relying on someone donating one for me, because they're a bit punchy in terms of price, but I think they're a beautiful rifle.
Now, I think I already know the answer to this question because of the caliber that you're opting for. But are you sort of a purist when it comes to things like buying a lovely, beautiful wooden stocked Kipplauf rifle, and will you not put a sound moderator on it, or are you going to go down the more sort of practical, sensible approach and moderate it?
Well, as it would be just my rifle for the occasion, I couldn't bring myself to put a moderation onto it, quite honestly. I think it would just have to, keep the integrity of the rifle, as it were, which is just that one shot. And so I'd probably keep it fairly simple, and I'd probably in truth put a fairly simple sight on it as well. But Swarovski, of course. But I'd probably put something simple on it. It's funny, chaps. I was talking to a client. I was out the other day, and I was talking to him, and I was sort of saying, I'm very much I like simple kit. I love the simple things. When I go out deer stalking, I like to just carry with me a bare minimum of kit. And all the time while I kind of looked at the irony of it was, because gradually it's very easy to start kitting yourself out with more and more stuff, isn't it? And as I was saying this in a kind of juxtaposition, I was putting my camera around my neck. I'd got my thermal imager around my neck, got my binoculars, got my rifle, got my shooting sticks, got a knife, got a little chest saw, and I was thinking to myself, God, you hypocrite! It's interesting. It's interesting how it creeps up on you. Kit creeps up on you because you're just thinking to yourself, well, I've got what I need. And then you see the benefits of another new bit of kit, and this is boys' toys. And before you know it, you're weighted down by a half a dozen bits of kit.
So I'm desperate to move on to Bobby's bits, which is all about kit. And I will explain to you, Peter, what that means, because you're now thinking, oh my God, what have I agreed to? But I've got one last listener question to ask, which is from Miles K. And he said, what's the best technique for calling muntjac?
Oh, I'm blowed if I know, Tom. Quite honestly, I mean, quite honestly, there's a wonderful Richard Pryor phrase which says, "Deer are predictably unpredictable." So the moment that anyone thinks that they can start, they've got some things down to a niche, down to a fine art. I think the deer quickly show them up to be an arrogant fool. So I shan't pretend to be the expert. Interesting, every year that the row rut comes round, I find that some days I'm out and it works beautifully. Some days I'm scratching my head and I can't call in a single thing. With muntjac, it's even worse, quite honestly. I mean, in truth, a simple peep, in a regular peep on a bootaloo works. In fact, I remember sitting in a high seed over in Oxfordshire, and in truth, I was sitting there and I heard this beep. I thought, what's that? And I waited for perhaps, and interestingly, which might give you an insight into calling them, it was probably about another 5 or 10 minutes before I heard another peep, and then another good many minutes before I heard another peep. And eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I thought I must go and just have a little look, see what that is. And I stalked into a young, what I suspect was an orphaned muntjac fawn. I think I saw the same muntjac a few weeks later, and it still was okay. So thank God, because I hate to see things that have been orphaned, and you've got that terrible decision of whether to dispatch a young animal or whether to hope that it's going to survive. But I remember at that time thinking, aha, now that is in truth an example of what a muntjac fawn will sound like. So my best bit of advice then, I suppose, from my own experience of actually seeing a muntjac fawn calling out or bleating for its mother was just that peep. But don't be too regular on it. Give it a few minutes, then another peep, and then another peep thereafter. And I think you'll probably pique the curiosity of any nearby muntjac. And so hopefully that gives some kind of answer to that question.
You started out incredibly modestly there, saying you had no idea how to do it, and then you just given our listener exactly the answer they were hoping for.
Oh, good.
So there you go.
It evolved, that answer, didn't it? It just evolved. So
it came to you.
I hope it's of some use.
So Bobby's Bits is the next segment of our podcast. It's not as bad as it sounds, I promise.
It sounds like it's going to be full of innuendo, Tom, to be honest with you.
No, Bobby's Bits is the one and only innuendo in the so Harry's brother is called Bobby, and it must be a couple of years ago now. We've been really dragging this out, but Bobby took a gap year, and he was in that like blissful part of life where you're still living at home, but you're working, and you literally feel like you've got all the money in the world because you're not paying rent, you've got no bills, nothing. And he's a keen deer stalker as well, so he went out and started buying shitloads of kit, loads of kit. And so every time I saw Harry, he'd be like, "Oh, Bobby's just bought this bipod, he's just bought this pair of binoculars, he's just bought this, he's bought that." And it became a bit of a running joke of, well, which bit of kit's Bobby got next on his list. And so what we like to ask our I was about to say listeners, guests, is okay, what one bit of kit is sort of on your list to buy, and also what one bit of kit could you sort of not live without? And you can't say your rifle or your scope. It's got to be sort of
really.
Yeah, afraid not.
So run that by me again. Bit of kit I want to buy, and a bit of kit I can't do without.
So in fairness, your one bit of kit you want to buy, you might want to say that's your K95. We can let you have that one unless there's something else. And then what one bit of kit couldn't you live without when you're out deer stalking?
Well, you're right about the aspirational side. If I'm honest with you, a break barrel rifle, a single shot break barrel rifle, doesn't have to be the Blaser. I mean, the Merkel's quite, it's very nice. There's some other nice rifles out there, but I think that's probably the aspirational bit of kit. So yes, love that. Very excited about that. That's something that I could really kind of, it's been a long time since I've gone to a gun shop and sort of thought, I'm really excited about getting my hands on this. But I remember picking up that carbon K95 in braces and just thinking, this is a bit of me. The only thing that wasn't a bit of me was the 10 grand price tag, I think it was. So I might have to put that off. I'll do a little bit of saving up before I go for that. So that's the bit that I would aspire to. In truth, gents, and I mean this quite genuinely, the bit of kit I simply cannot go without. And I would go out with different rifles, I would go out with different knives, I will sometimes have a thermal, I will sometimes do without a thermal. The one bit I absolutely won't go without is my Swarovski EL rangefinder binoculars. And they have been, I think if you watch the films going back a very long time now, that's been a feature that I will always have strung around my neck. It's a beautiful bit of glass. Now, I know your listeners are going to yawn. They're going to go, yeah, but they're sponsored by Swarovski and all this, that, and the other. But, we're glad for it, because I think anyone that comes afresh to deer stalking looks at that Swarovski as the aspirational bit of kit to have. And once you've bought those binoculars, then you really struggle to do without them, and with the rangefinder there on them as well. When you're up in the Highlands, or when you're out with even if you're out with a novice and you don't want to be stretching that shot too far, you want to keep them within their reasonable limits, then having that rangefinder on them is invaluable. So that's got to be it, gents. I think the Harry Tom, I think it's the Swarovski EL binoculars with the rangefinder on them.
And I would echo you as well in terms of one of the bits of kit. If I've left it at home, I really kick myself for is my binoculars that have got rangefinder in as well, for exactly the same reasons you've just described. And I find it helps me sort of plan a stalk as well. I can't remember who I was having this conversation with the other day, but even if you sort of see a deer and you range it and you think, well, that's miles too far to take a shot, you can then range other things in the kind of the foreground or whatever and go, well, if I get to there, then that's another 100 meters further forward, and so then I know I'm within 200 meters of whatever it is I'm about to shoot. They're such a valuable tool.
Well, I'm a big fan. Any client that's been out with me will know that I'm a big fan of this kind of still stalking, this very slow progress through the woodlands. You know, that is, I think, when you really get in tune with nature. And you know, the areas that I stalk, you know, when you've got roe, when you've got muntjac in particular, you know, territorial animals in roe, you can't walk into a block of Hampshire woodland or countryside where there is going to be a void. There is no void when it comes to territorial animals. You know, it's going to be, there is going to be a resident roe in there. And invariably, if you take it slowly and you look with those binoculars, and I will spend an enormous amount of time looking through those binoculars, it is incredible how often you just catch a glimpse of something. And you know, gents, personally, I would say, you know, I may not be, and I would hold my hand up here and say, I may not be the best shot in the world, but I know that probably the greatest art as a hunter is being able to spot things, to be able to see things. And the difference between those people who are successful time and time again is invariably because they take time to look, to scan. And they scan the woodland and they can pick up animals whereby other people have traipsed across a bit of ground and just gone, there was nothing in there. When I know full well there was, they perhaps just weren't looking carefully enough. And one of the things that make you able to look carefully enough is good optics. So I would say, you know, that investment in a good pair of binoculars and having that strung around my neck is undoubtedly the best bit of kit that I've ever got hold of.
Very well said. It's a sort of old adage, isn't it? You can't shoot what you can't see, and it's so true. I remember going out. My very sort of first stalking outing was with a chap who'd been stalking for about 40 or 50 years, and the first thing that struck me was how long it took him to cover any amount of ground, especially in woodland, because he would just stop and look constantly. And it was one of the best lessons I ever learned. And you know, it only takes you going out with a thermal to see how much is actually out there. That you just walk past a lot of the time. You know, even if you do spend a lot of time looking through binoculars, incredible how well things are considered.
Yes, I think, you know, you want that patience. We all have busy lives, don't we? And you know, we rock up in the car and we think, right, it's 2 hours until it's dark, or it's 3 hours until it's dark. Let's cover as much ground as we can. But I think, again, you know, that's an error, covering too much ground, habituating the deer to your presence. You know, I'm a firm believer that it's better to just stalk a smaller area and do it properly rather than traipsing all over the place. Of course, you know, this is different to hunting on the open hill and those sort of places whereby you do have to cover ground. But you know, for me as a lowland woodland stalker, you know, those types of that type of hunting is invariably what we're about.
So we've absolutely peppered you with questions, Peter, and I'm amazed you're still going and still putting up with this.
That's a pleasure, James, honestly.
Going to ask one last question before we let you go, which is in relation to venison itself, because I think you said right from the very beginning, you said that's the reason we do what we do. So do you have a particular species of venison or cut of venison or anything like that you really sort of is the epitome for you?
Well, honestly, chaps, as you might expect, after being in the industry for a while, I'm quite opinionated on this one. So I started off, you know, I think if you asked a beef farmer what his favorite cut of beef was, he'd probably tell you. But, you know, he would also say, well, yes, but there's different types of things for different tastes. And I think you've got to be mindful that that's what venison provides you as well. You know, if you want a fattier, more beef-like flavor, then, you know, Sika deer is probably where it's at. If you like a much sort of finer, tighter meat, then, you know, you might be looking at muntjac or something like that. They each have their benefits, and I think, you know, when you are preparing a meal, and I do actually, in fact, gents, I quite like my cooking. You know, and I do a lot of cooking with venison at home, and so it's important to use the cut and to use the species according to the dish that you're eating. So if I'm going to eat a steak, I quite like, if I'm eating a beef steak, I quite like ribeyes, I quite like the fattier cuts of beef. So for me, a pure steak, I would probably go with Sika deer as my favourite. But in truth, my favourite dish here, gents, and I'm afraid to say I'm going to shamelessly utilise a recipe that I got. Now, this is harping back to that Shooting and Hunting Academy. One of the things that you'll find on there is a venison masterclass by a chap called Azimakis Chaniotis. Now, Akis, as we call him, he's one of our club members, and he was one of London's youngest Michelin star chefs. Works up at Pied de Terre up in London. And we went up there to film a venison masterclass with him. He gave his time up and he cooked, I think, 6 different dishes, all made out of venison. And there's a few things actually that I took away from it. And one was that if you're eating out in these sort of Michelin star restaurants, just how rich the food is. The liberal use of butter and salt and things like that is there. But the other thing that I took away from it is just how a Michelin star chef, in truth, even if I added the same ingredients that he did, he's just got a little bit of magic in his fingertips. There's some type of ingredient that he was able to put into those dishes that just meant that whenever he produced something, even if it was the same quantities, if it was the same ingredients, it was just better than what I can do. But the recipe I took away from him, gents, and the one I use more than anything else is venison tartare. And it is absolutely brilliant. And I love it. It transforms venison, which is otherwise thought of as very often as a kind of a winter dish, casseroles and things like that. It transforms it into a summer dish because it's brilliantly light. You add various different ingredients into it, which give it just an absolute fresh, really fabulous taste. And so I produce an awful lot of that venison tartare, and whenever we've got friends coming over, then that's what I would put into it. And in choice, the type of venison I'd put into it, I'd probably use muntjac, if I'm honest with you. I think it's just has that slightly finer. But one thing, and I'm showboating here, aren't I? I'm grabbing the platform here. But in actual fact, everyone talks about the species of deer and which is better. But one thing I have found is that the most important thing is the age of the deer, in truth. And I would far rather eat a yearling fallow deer than an old muntjac. And whatever it is you're going for, give some thought to the age of the deer along with the species. And that's one of the things that us deer stalkers have, don't we? We're not just getting a slab of venison off the counter at Tesco's or Waitrose or wherever we shop, are we? Which we don't know the history of, we don't know where it's come from, we don't know the age of the deer. One of the brilliant things about being a deer manager is you can select the animal that you want to put on and serve up on your dinner table, can't you? And that's an absolute privilege. So venison tartare, steaks, I'd say Sika, but venison tartare, probably muntjac.
Fantastic. That is actually one of my top venison dishes as well. And Jose Lesuso, we've had on the podcast, in this book, venison, does a great recipe that is my absolute favourite. But you mustn't eat too much of it, or I must. Very easy mistake.
Not for breakfast, then, Harry.
No, a very small amount. That'd be my advice. For obvious reasons. But we've been going on for well over an hour now, Peter. So thank you so much for giving up so much of your time to come and speak to us. It's been immensely interesting. And yeah, we will absolutely follow along and see how everything goes with the Shooting and Hunting Academy, and can't wait to see what the sort of next step is in the sort of Capreolus Club and County Deer Stalking journey. So yeah, thank you ever so much for joining.
Well, thank you, gents, and quite honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure. So nice to speak with you both. And yeah, blimey, 20 to 9, it's getting late, isn't it?
Yeah. Look forward to seeing the K95 in your next film.
Absolutely.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Harry.
Thanks, Peter.
Take care. Thanks. Bye now.